Hi guys, and welcome back to Crafty Quilting Designs. I hope you're well and having a beautiful day wherever you are. So today we are going to talk about quilting. Let me put my glasses on because as much as I'm not looking directly at myself, I'm looking at you, I can't really see detail. So even if I glance at myself, I can then look at that. I can see myself now. So I wanted to talk to you about quilting today. Because I just came back from lunch with my husband, and on the way there and on the way back, I was thinking about how can I conversate with you guys about quilting on a one-on-one rather than showing you on the quilt itself, because I think sometimes just having that dialogue open is a lot more easier for you to understand. Now, I would start by saying when I first started quilting, and I haven't actually been quilting for very long, and I'm referring to the quilting methods on the quilt itself. I haven't been doing that for very, very long, probably 2 years. Okay. Now, when I first started, I thought it was an absolutely crazy idea to take a yard of fabric, cut it up into pieces, and make a quilt from it. But here I am today. Okay, now I remember how I actually started quilting as well. I started quilting because I was sewing a top. I was making a nice little top, and I remember Jenny Doan from Missouri Star came on. Obviously, I was watching YouTube, and she started cutting up this fabric, and I'm thinking, hell no, absolutely hell no, I ain't doing that. That is absolutely crazy. But here I am today doing the exact same thing. Now, I started to make my first quilt, and of course comes the opportunity when you have to first actually quilt the quilt. But then I did Stitch in the Ditch, and that was easy enough. Okay, but then I started enjoying this thing called quilting, and for me, I liked stretching myself. I want to know that I can actually do it. So one of the things I started doing was research. So I researched it, and that research came about by watching other people do it. And I'm talking about free motion quilting. Okay, I learned a lot about the long arm and the sewing machine and the throat space, and why it's so important when it comes to actual quilting. Because when you're sewing or making garments, it is not too much important, the throat space that is, because then the sewing machine you buy, it's more other utilities, stitch and other bits and bobs that you would have on a machine. Whereas a quilting machine, it can just do straight stitch. You don't necessarily need all the glitz and glam on a sewing machine. So I started doing a lot of research, and I think that's one of the ways to start to understand the process. As much as it is a visual aid in the sense that it looks really good, it looks really nice, sometimes the eyes and the brain, it just doesn't blend together, and so therefore you have to do a little bit of reading to actually get the understanding about quilting. Now, we all know that quilting is just the idea of making sure those 3 layers of fabric is together, it actually stays together, and the more quilting you add to that quilt, it makes it a bit more stiff. Yeah, it makes it really dense, a lot of dense quilting, and so therefore it's really grabbing all those layers together. Less quilted quilt is a lot more soft. Okay, for example, the one behind me, I am doing swirls in it, and it's very much spaced apart, and they're lovely and large. It still holds all 3 layers together, but it's not dense quilting, and it's not so less bendy and less flexible, if that makes sense to you. So I started with a lot of planning. Okay, I would plan every single quilt idea that I wanted to do. And you may think, well, why do I need to plan the quilt? It's important. It's important that when you get to that sewing machine, you know what you're doing, because you're going to get to that sewing machine and you're going to stop and you say, the nerves are going to set in. And I'm talking from experience, the nerves are going to set in. But if you start planning what you want to do, and I've often said this in my tutorials, that the quilt should talk to you, and it should say to you what sort of quilting method is required for that particular quilt. And you may think, oh, she's talking garbage, or, you know, it doesn't make sense. How can the quilt talk to you? No, I don't mean literally. Okay, what I mean is because you've done all your planning and your research, the ideas should come to you a little bit more easily. That is what I'm referring to. Because one of the things that I usually say to people, first of all, before you start quilting, let's do the planning. What sort of quilting methods you want to add to that quilt? Now, I would usually say, when I was a little girl, I learned to write on this, yeah. And I'm going back to penmanship, where your teacher would write on the board, and she will formulate the letters touching the top and the bottom, so that you can join your words so nicely. You know, that sort of script writing, especially when you're learning to write your name, you know. So, or even when you're learning the alphabet, she will start with the A, touch, come back down, go back up. And you were taught to stay within those lines. Well, get yourself a lined book, obviously blank. Okay, get yourself a lined one. Even if you have one and there is no lines on it, you draw your lines on it and you start practicing your quilting. Now, obviously there's a lot, and there's some that you can invent. Remember, I try to say to people, take away the stresses or the strains of this is what you should do. I don't see quilting like that. To me, quilting is a personal art form, and what you put on your quilt is your art. All right. And I think the more you think about it in that way, the stress levels goes down, the confidence level builds up, and you start to relax when it comes to quilting, because this is your truth. This is your quilting. This is what your ideas, this is what your quilts say I want to be quilted on. Okay. So practice with lined paper. That will help you to teach you to stay within the lines. And the reason why I say that, let's take, for example, a jelly roll quilt, such as the one sitting behind me. Okay. One of the things that I love about a jelly roll quilt, and this is how I actually taught myself, and I will insert a clip of one of my first quilts. Okay, now I have one of many first quilts, and this particular first quilt I'm referring to is a scrappy quilt, right? Now this particular scrappy quilt has lots of lines in the terms of whether it be 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inches in terms of the block. Okay, so on that particular quilt, I did so many different quilting patterns. Okay, now the reason why I say a jelly roll is perfect is because you can stay within the confinements of the line. Just like when you were learning to write, you were taught to stay within that confinements. That engages your brain. Okay, so that when you are quilting on your quilt, if you say you want to stay within that jelly roll line or that 8-inch rectangular fabric that you sewn together for your block, or that 10-inch, if you want to stay within that lines, you can, because you've already conditioned your brain to stay within those particular grids or seam lines, etc. on your quilt. Okay, even if you want to start dividing your quilt down. So the first thing, number one, as I said, is planning. Start thinking about it. Don't just jump on the sewing machine and then start quilting, because you're gonna freeze up. Okay. Number two is drawing paper. Get some paper, start drawing on your ideas, get your lined paper and start drawing it down. Now, one of the first or easiest quilting method is meandering or stipple, whatever it may be. Okay, you start with that. Even if you want to take your lines and you just want to stay within your lines, and I just want to draw something and show you, up and down, just wavy lines like so. Okay, I stayed within my line. Now, if you do that, or if you echo that over and over again, you have a beautiful pattern for your quilt. A very beautiful, simplistic pattern. And you just have wavy lines. And imagine that all over your quilt. It will look absolutely beautiful. Okay, it will allow the quilt to be flowy as well because it will be nicely spaced apart. But the objective here is to stay within those lines. So that way it's easier. You've mastered that. Once you've done that 3 or 4 times, you've mastered staying in between the lines. And then you can think about going on to something else. So another easy quilting method could be triangle. So then now if you want to extend it a little bit bigger to a bigger block, I would do something like this. Yeah, just some triangles. And again, if you do that over and over again, you have a beautiful pattern. Until, again, you start developing your confidence and just growing. Now, with every quilt that I quilt, I tend to, most times, put it down on paper. And I'll show you, just as this book here is what I tend to use. And I'll just show you here. Look at that, for example. The first place I've just turned onto, there is little samples there. All right, let's see if I can find some more. Look at that. All right, all in pencil. Let's see any more. So you just practice. You put something down on paper and get the ideas flowing. That just prevents you from, look at these ones. And sometimes I'm not doing it neat and tidy. It is just to get an idea of what I want to put on the quilt. Okay, so planning and drawing out your ideas. Start with something simple, start with meandering, start with loop-to-loops, whatever it is to help you get over your fear. Now, the next thing I would definitely say to start getting your quilting up to scale is a sample piece. Now, I did a lot of sample pieces when I was teaching myself to quilt, because that's what you're doing. You're teaching yourself to quilt. As much as you watch other people on YouTube do it, yeah, or whether you read about it, at some point you have to dive in. So what I used to do is when I was making a quilt, I would make an extra block, okay? And I will quilt that block. Why? Because this is the plan that I'm going forward with. So I've now taken away the plan from the paper and I've put that plan onto my sample block, okay? And I'll bring it in a little bit closer so hopefully you can see what I did. Look, you can see that triangle there. You can see a little rows or circles. I wouldn't even call it a row, it's just circle going round and round. You can see some little swirls at the top there because it is just practice. That's all it is. And I would also use different colors in terms of my thread. And the reason why I say that, because when I turned it round, I wanted to see at the back. And that's what I was thinking. I'm thinking, well, what if I turn at the back? So whatever I use at the back for my sample is what I actually use for the quilt, because this is a realistic view. The drawings isn't so much, okay? It's a planning stage. But once I actually put it on my sample, it becomes real. And when you have this piece of sample here, when you start quilting, you can have this next to you so that you know where you're going with your quilting. You have an idea. Your plan is already set. Okay? So that's just one of my first 3 tips to you. So after practicing your sample, okay, what I need you to do, or to not do in this case, is to critique it. Don't do that. Quilting is not about perfection. It's not. I can tell you there's many times when I was starting off, there are a lot of mistakes on my quilt. And when I say a lot of mistakes, we sometimes be very hard on ourselves. If the curve is not perfect, oh, it's wrong, it's not good, it doesn't look like this, it doesn't look like that. That is not what it's about. Remember, you are the artist. You are putting your ideas down. You don't see, or hear about an artist critiquing his work in a negative manner. You don't. Because in the moment, when you are in that moment, whatever you put down is your beauty, is your truth, is what you want to do. Give it a take, of course. You will possibly make mistake, but that's why you have this. That's why you've done your sample. I'm not saying that on the quilt is going to be perfect, but what I'm saying is that if you do make a mistake, echo that mistake. So if you were supposed to make an A and you end up making an O, just go over it. Remember when you were little and you were drawing and you were tracing? You can trace over it. Another thing I should have mentioned with the planning, another thing I used to do, I bought myself some heat erasable pens, and I would literally on my sample write it or draw it on. And if you look closely, I doubt you can possibly make it out, but there's little yellow shadows within the lines on the triangles there. And that's because with my sample was yellow. I didn't take off the heat because it's not that important. It is a sample. So get a heat erasable pen and draw it on. And all you need to do then is trace it over. Remember again, even if you're a little bit shaky, that is not a problem. You know, this is called free motion quilting, meaning that you yourself is not a long arm. You're not inputting data into the computer of the sewing machine. Your arms are moving it. Your hand is moving it. All right. So you need to start literally relaxing so that it can come naturally. And even if you make a mistake, as I said, echo it. When it comes to quilting, there is nothing to do with perfection. It does not exist. Do not do that to yourself. Because when you put it together, you don't see that. You don't see that. Look how beautiful that looks. This is a sample from my butterfly bouquet quilt. Look how long ago I made that. And I'm quite confident that my quilting is a lot more better. And I'll share a secret with you. Not every quilt I quilt, I put passion into it. Some of it is just to get it through it quickly so that I can move on to the next one. Because I don't like spending more than a few days or a week on a quilt. Because obviously I do the YouTube channels. And so my objective is to release a video once a week. Sometimes I may get away with 2, if I'm lucky, if I get the time to do it. Okay. But most of the times it's 1 video a week that I actually release. And that's because of the quilting. If I were just making the quilt tops and showing it to you, that's fine. But I love showing the end result. I do. So not all of my quilts are quilted with passion. It has to get done in this particular way. And because of that, I may do a meander. I may do wavy lines. I may do swirls. Okay, I may even do a stitch in the ditch, but it doesn't matter as long as it's quilted. And what I love about it is that when it's quilted, the quilt comes alive. It really does. Okay, one of the things I want you to think about is that when you are quilting, that you see the needle, you concentrate on that needle. Think of it as your finger moving. Okay, that's what you need to think of it. Think of it as writing, because literally that's what quilting is. You writing on the quilt with the needle. The cotton or the thread in this case is the ink. And you're leaving an impression everywhere you've been. That's what it is. So if you can transition yourself to the needle. And I know this may sound really stupid, but try it. Really try, because sometimes we have the silliest things that's blocking us from actually moving forward with the quilting. So for me, when I was learning, and I still do this today, I think about, this is the needle and where I want to go. And before you know it, you become one with it. Your shoulders are down. You're not tense like this. You're not getting shoulder pain. That's because you're starting to relax with it and your confidence is growing. Let me just have some water. So I just really want you to try and get that through your head. Quilting is about confidence and it's about practice. Yeah? When you practice, your confidence builds. Because you're practicing, your confidence builds. Because you're confident, you try new things. That's simply the way it goes. I can sit here and show you on the sewing machine and turn the machine on and start quilting, but I don't think that helps because I've done that before, and I've still a lot of you always say, you make it look so easy. How do you do it? Well, guys, I'm telling you how I did it. That's exactly what I did. I started with planning. I draw on paper. I use all of my heat erasable pens or my sample pieces, and I give up on perfection. And the thing is, life is just so strange. When you give up on putting that pressure on yourself, it's like a light bulb goes on. Why? Because now you can relax. Now you think, I don't care what happens anymore. I'm just going to quilt. And you get it. You simply just get it. It works. And many times it's the pressure, the tenseness. You know, you're moving so slow and so slow when you're quilting that your stitches are so tiny, you know, and then your stitches are hesitant. Just be free with it. Practice on your sample pieces. I just really want you to be able to be confident when it comes to quilting, because I always believe that the quilt story is not completed until it's quilted. And I strongly believe that because I have, I think, about 2 or 3 more quilts to complete, and it's in my sewing room. And as you know, if you've seen my sewing channel, once I have quilted my quilt, I tend to move it to another room. And so far they have been stuck, these unquilted quilt tops have been stuck in this room here, and they're not with the others. And I know that may sound really far-fetched, but that's how I relate to it. Their story hasn't been completed because I haven't told you about them. You may have seen me make them. You may have seen me made them into a quilt top, but they're not completed into that warm, beautiful quilt with all of those fancy, beautiful stitches that brings it alive. Okay? The other thing I wanted to add before I end this chat with you, when you're doing your sample pieces, don't be afraid to try new threads. Colors I'm referring to here. This is when you start really getting into it, trying different colors. Try not to stick with the grays or the whites or the blacks or the browns. Try and add different color. Let the quilting be shown. And on this particular one, the back of the quilt, it is a white. It is white fabric. And I did show you in the video. So if you want to go check it out, I'll put a link up for you if you can see it. And I'll also put a link up for the scrappy quilt that I quilted. And the reason why I mentioned the scrappy quilt is because when I did that first scrappy quilt, my fear disappeared when it came to the quilting. I'll tell you why. It's really strange. It disappeared because in my brain was saying to me, well, you've already used the majority of the fabric to do something beautiful or to make this really lovely quilt or to cut the pieces properly. So this is just scrap. So because I convinced myself that it was just end pieces or scrap pieces, that it wasn't important, the fabric wasn't important, if I make a mistake, I'm okay. And that again released the pressure of having to make sure that I quilted this with perfection. So start with a scrappy quilt. Hey, even buy some Temu fabrics, some cheap fabrics, and do it. because Timu's fabrics is cheap enough for you to make a mistake on, echo it, and you'll be surprised at how beautiful it comes out. So guys, I do hope that from this particular chat that I have inspired you and encouraged you to really try to do quilting. There is no other way to achieve it other than simply getting on your sewing machine and trying it. And if you feel tired and bored, just get up and go. Stop. Don't push yourself. I still do that today. If I'm quilting my quilt and I'm just a bit tired and I'm not feeling it, because sometimes you need to have the energy. And I don't mean the energy in terms of being tired. What I'm referring to is that energy that draws you to the quilt, that says, I want to quilt today. I'm excited about it. Because we only respond to things if we're really excited in a positive manner. So if you're tired and you're not feeling into it, just let it go. Do it another day or come back to it 3 hours later. And many times the quilting is even better because you've given yourself a break from it. All right. So I hope I have really encouraged you and I have given you some ideas in terms of quilting. I mean, you can go online and search and look at different people, you know, quilting, but it all comes down to it. You got to practice. Okay. And I hope I've given you some ideas with the planning. Go through the planning, look at the quilt and see what you can, and start simple. Literally, just go for it. I watched Angela Walters a lot. And to be honest, I have her to thank because she did teach me a lot. She really did. But no, I don't even watch her anymore. I really don't. Because I don't always do intricate quilting on my quilts anymore. And if I have to, I am going to plan it. And that's a quilt that I'm going to take my time with. I would probably take about a week and a half, 2 weeks, depending on the size of the quilt, to quilt it so beautifully. And that is something I would want to give to somebody because I want it to be so lovely. Okay? So choose, as I said, the type of quilting you want for the quilt. Let the quilt talk to you. So if it's a scrappy one, you can do all different designs. And as I said before, I would link that to that video where I did so many designs of quilting on there. It was unbelievable, but it looked so beautiful. It looked so beautiful. And I still look at this quilt and I said, wow, this was my practice quilt. And that's another thing you can do as well. As I said that, I also created a practice quilt to practice on. And this was just fabric that I didn't really care for. I just created a big long, like a table runner. I think it was a bed runner. And I actually just quilted on that row by row. I think it didn't have jelly rolls in it, but it had lines on the fabric. And I used that to do all of my free motion, just all the wishbones, the hourglasses, and I practiced on that for hours until it was completed. Okay, I think I have a clip of it. I'll insert it for you. So with that being said, I am going to love you and leave you now. As I said, I hope I have really encouraged you and that I have given you some ideas, and believe in yourself. You can do it. It all starts with a belief. If you believe that you can do it, you are your own champion. I mean, you have me cheering for you. But you are your own champion. Give yourself a break, you know, pat yourself on the back and say, hey, I did a good job today. All right, guys? So love you lots. Have a good one. And it's very sure that you would see me in a couple days' time when I've uploaded this beauty here. She's almost done. So I'm going to go back and quilt now. And I'll see you at the weekend, guys. Love you lots. Have a good one. Happy quilting. And bye for now.